everyone, it's Electra. I'm back. Thanks for watching. I am a 44-year-old recently transitioning male to female with autism. That was recently diagnosed as well with major depression, bipolar 2, anxiety, and that's about all I want to name right now. So thank you again for watching. And what's going on today? So I've been having some downloads about what the future of this country is or what it holds, and more so, what do we need to do about that right now? I've been, like I talked about leaving the country last video, but let's be honest, what country would I even go to that wants a 44-year-old transgender, autistic, pretty much, well, not every mental disorder, but most of them? And like, what country is going to accept that? No one. No country wants Americans, even if they're like fully normal, if you know, to use a word for lack of a better word. I do have a useful skill, but I mean, it's not like I want to do it anymore. That was a different life. And in this new life now, I'm 44, I'm in midlife crisis mode, transition. And I think the difference between this midlife crisis and the quarter life crisis I had in my late 20s, early 30s is I'm much more in touch with my own mortality now, and I think that's normal. Once you're in your 40s, you start to feel that a lot more. And I think for me, that's manifesting in a way of like, how do I want to be remembered and how do I want to be thought of when I'm no longer here? And I may as well go ahead and give you a content trigger warning. I may be mentioning death or death-related topics. So just so you're aware, possible trigger warning. But I've been a student of history now for like, well, my whole life really, but seriously for about the last 10 years. And it's like, I've always wondered, like, how did this revolution happen? How did that war happen? How were so many people convinced to risk their life and limb for a cause that they really could have just stayed home and like read a book in a lot of cases? But I think in a lot of ways though too, like, you know, there's this misconception that we have, and when I say we, I mean like thinking, feeling people, the people that are feeling left out in this country right now and feel like there's no future. Thinking, feeling people have a misconception that 100% of the population needs to be on board with something before there's a chance of success. And that is not true at all. This is something that is common in history. Really any revolution that has happened, whether political or violent or otherwise, I think it's something like 15% of the population needs to be involved for it, and that's all it takes. I mean, that's really not much. You know, the vast majority of people are going to be mostly living their lives as before, except under some new conditions, maybe, you know, maybe there won't be various consumer products available, or there could be rationing on certain food items. For example, in World War II, like makeup wasn't as available as it was before and after, because the products used to make makeup were, I think, are mostly petroleum based. So of course, petroleum was at a premium during any war, really. I mean, especially World War II, where everything was, you know, I mean, in a lot of ways, it was fought over petroleum, especially Japan in the East. So I've been having some ideas about how do we move forward. And I mean, it's clear to me that the past is over. I mean, everything we thought worked in the past is no longer working. And when I say that, I mean like organized protests. When was the last time a protest really worked? It's a token measure to make people feel better in the moment, but then they all go home and forget about it. And it doesn't inconvenience the people or cost them financially enough to actually, entertain whatever demands the protesters have. Protesting is a relatively recent thing. I don't recall hearing much about protesting, at least until the 20th century. Before that, how did things happen? Well, let's look at the American Civil War. By the mid-1850s, the Whig Party had totally gone away. The Whigs were just destroyed by, at the time, the Democratic Party, which was the party of the South, it was heavily based in the South and heavily associated with the slaveholding interest, the slave trade, and just Southern rights in general. So there was this huge vacuum in the political system that was never really filled until a lot of the former Whigs, for example, Abraham Lincoln, a lot of the former Whigs like Lincoln, a lot of the people that would in the future be in his cabinet or in his administration somehow, William H. Seward of New York, who actually came very close to being the Republican nominee in 1860 rather than Lincoln, but that's another story. Most people don't know who that is today, but he was very close to running for president in 1860 instead of Lincoln. And there's a group that I've known about for several years called the Wide Awakes, that were, these days you would probably call them like a militia, but I don't think that's a fair description. They were a northern-based political group that was nonviolent. I do want to stress they were nonviolent. They did not cause really any civil disturbance, unless you count marching in the streets at night with lit torches, domestic disturbance. But back then, it was different. There were no cars yet. Everything was horse-drawn, horse-drawn buggies or things of that nature. And I ordered a book that just came out 6 months ago. I kind of wish I wrote this book first. I discovered this group in one of my readings, probably an old book from might have been from the 1940s about the Civil War and the lead up to the Civil War. But if it wasn't for reading that old obscure book, I don't know if I ever would have known about it, because I've read a lot of books on the Civil War and the lead up to the Civil War, and I can't think of many books that are modern that have mentioned it, which kind of tells you something. It kind of tells you that for whatever reason, it's just been forgotten, and it almost makes you wonder, are people trying to cover up what they were, and to protect their interests today or in the recent past. So it was like a nonviolent group, mainly younger people in their 20s, mostly men, white and black. This was in the North, so there were a lot of black men allowed, a lot of free black men or fugitive slaves from the South who fled north for safety and freedom. And it's really just an inspiring thing to me to see how that formed and how that people that were not de facto Southern friendly or allied, or in this case today, it's more so along the lines of oligarchy rather than slavery, although I think, slavery does still exist. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news for anyone that didn't know that, but slavery does still exist. It's mainly referred to as our employment market for full-time, but that's another topic. And it also takes the form of the corporate dominance of what used to be an economy for the people. So, yeah, so the Wide Awakes were today they'd be called left-wing, believe it or not. The Republican Party was actually founded as a left-wing party. It wasn't called that at the time, but anyone who seriously analyzes what they actually did and believed in, they were leftists, for sure. Abraham Lincoln was a leftist. No one wants to tell you that either. In fact, he advocated for workers' rights in terms of strike. He absolutely would be called a communist if he was a politician today. So, yeah, I don't know. Been thinking about assembling, recruiting, forming a group, and how that might impact my personal safety. Everyone wants to be safe and continue living for the most part. But, so going back to history, it's like, well, what had to happen for people to just essentially stop caring about their own personal safety, their own personal bubble, where things are relatively comfortable? Well, yeah, things either have to get so uncomfortable for what is that called? Critical mass, for a critical mass of people that overthrowing a government is possible. And it doesn't take everybody. It doesn't take much at all. Hopefully violence doesn't have to happen, but governments tend to get violent when they feel threatened. That's a fact. And I've also been looking into the 1979 Nicaragua revolution that was successful. No one really talks about this in recent history either. The only way I knew about it when I was a kid in the 80s was I remember hearing about the Iran-Contra scandal, which was our reaction in the 1980s to this successful communist/leftist revolution. They overthrew a tyrannical leader, might have been a president, I'm not sure what title they used, but he was in a lot of ways very similar to our new current president. And it's also, really making me realize, as much as we like to think, we're like a European society, that's no longer true, hasn't been true for decades at the least. And we kind of have more in common with Latin America banana republics, for lack of a better word. Central America, South America. So I've read this book that was talked about both the Colombian Revolution it was an attempted revolution called by a group called FARC, FARC, that failed. And then the one I was more interested in, I already knew about the FARC, and I knew that it just didn't really work out for them. But it did work out for the FSLN in Nicaragua, which was being led by this mafia boss, crime family type of guy who was brutal but yet his family ruled for close to 20 years by the time the revolution finally happened. So I could easily see us going in that direction. This group called the FSLN formed in the early 60s and was relatively small, had very few members until 1978, mid to late 70s. The critical event was when an earthquake happened in Managua, Nicaragua, in 1972, and that's when the city of Managua is the capital. It's the largest city to my knowledge, and it was just destroyed by this earthquake. And like nobody rebuilt, nobody did anything about it. So conditions just got worse and worse and worse for the majority of the population. Now, smaller country like Nicaragua it's very small. All the people live in a very concentrated area. Unlike the United States, that is much more spread out. So much empty and open land between major cities, especially west of the Rockies. There's areas of the Southwest that I've driven through personally that, and I know it's like this in the rest of the more in the Northwest too. There's hundreds of miles, you can drive hundreds of miles and like not really come through a major city or even like a smaller city. You might find a few like truck stops or something with a few motels, but that's about it. And so obviously things are very different here, but in the late 1850s, the Wide Awakes dealt with a relatively more rural northern United States. It was the more urbanized of the North and South for sure, with cities like Boston, New York, DC. Surprisingly, was kind of considered a southern city back then, but DC too, and Chicago was starting. It was still fairly small, but it definitely had these Republican ideologies of, more left wing, if you could call it that, and basically anti-slavery. All that to say, it can happen. The answers are out there. They don't get highlighted for a reason, but they're out there if you know where to find them. And I'm thinking that might be one of my callings, is bringing these things to the forefront. And because really people need to feel like they have hope and they can actually have a future and something could actually be done about this. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean we're all going to survive that. But if you believe in reincarnation like I do, you'll come back to a much better world, hopefully. But that's a whole other topic. Please like, comment, subscribe. I hope to hear from you. Nice comments only, please, or constructive comments. And I'll see you for the next one. Take care. Bye.